Michael, I'm so glad you could join me today. How have you been?
Yeah, very good. There's a sort of a certain crazed intensity about living in England at the moment. The rolling news cycle seems to be rolling ever faster, but I'm quite busy at the moment. So I guess like a lot of composers and a lot of people who might be listening, we kind of isolate ourselves off in our studios, in our rooms, and just keep our heads down. Seems to be the best way to carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I've got to say, I seem to have just heard a constant stream of negative news out of the UK since I don't know what was it, May of 2016. So,
Oh yeah, I
uh,
mean, almost all self-inflicted as well. We're like we're sort of repeatedly punching ourselves in the face, but God bless them
but
all.
at least you're able to isolate yourself a little bit and hopefully
That's
tune
right.
some of that out. So,
Exactly.
what sort of things have you been working on? And I know that maybe if some of it's film, TV related, maybe it's too early to give any juicy details.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's um, th- talking to film and TV composers. I always think is a sort of uh, sometimes a thankless task, sometimes slightly fruitless in that you're absolutely right. When you're on something, particularly if it's a new something that isn't a sort of a continuing series, then you're almost always locked into slightly complicated non-disclosure agreements under pain of excommunication in terms of actually sort of saying too much. But actually, where I'm at the moment is slightly different in that I, one of the facets of the last maybe 10, 15 years with the writing I do is that TV, by not particularly by choice rather than film, but I've been lucky enough to be involved in some TV series that I've run, and you never know when you start, when you see the first sort of maybe an assembly cut, or you see a pilot episode. You know, everybody's wise with hindsight, but at the time when you first see it, nobody knows whether it's going to be good. You're you're filled with enthusiasm because that really should be your sort of default state anyway. So it's great, whatever it is. I'm happy to see it and happy to make a start, but there's this sort of alignment of stars, a sort of constellation that has to happen really uh, for a TV show, particularly to really capture the imagination of people who would watch it to such an extent that they would want another series and then another series after that and then another series and for it to keep running and that sort of enthusiasm from the audience has to be matched by the um, continuing availability of the main cast of
Mhm.
the showrunners, the writers, the execs, the composers, everybody involved. And so what I have on my desk, literally sort of in front of me, if you could turn the camera round or whichever point it downwards, is a UK show called Unforgotten, and we're just working on series 5 of that right now. Um, and Unforgotten for me has been something you can find it on Netflix for non non UK viewers. It's both a beautiful show in its own right. It's a very kind of understated human show where the two main detectives solve sort of historic murders, but it's much less about the sort of procedure and sort of car chases as it is about people.
Hmm.
And um, from I think it's 7 or 8 years ago that we started on this particular series. Um, I had long, tortuous discussions and many versions of trying ideas for the producers and the creators of the show while we tried to find a musical language which was really weighted towards the emotional side and towards framing everybody whatever they might have done, whether they did in fact turn out to be a ghastly murderer, or whether they were sort of just kind of troubled people, to frame them with a kind of with musical dignity in a way, and respect. And so the musical language for the show has ended up being very close to, I think, probably my kind of native tongue, if you'd like, my sort of natural musical language, with strings and the amazing cellist Peter Gregson playing these sort of soaring cello lines, and me playing the piano. It's very sort of very much a language I'm comfortable in. But having said all of that, and it's one of the favorite projects I think I've ever done, there's still 6 hours of TV to do quite quickly. So even though we all know each other really well, and it's been the same director for every frame, Andy Wilson, who's amazing, and the same showrunner, the same team, there still comes a point when you do have to place your arse in the chair, if you found the expression, and work on the episodes. And that's where I'm at right now. I think as we speak, I am just about to start episode 5 of 6, so kind of 2/3 of the way through.
Nice. And so with a project like that, or a project like Sherlock that ran for 4 seasons, and I don't know, what is it, 3 or 4 hour-long episodes a season, I think.
Yeah, I mean that had in a way sort of originated a slightly new format of 3 90-minute episodes.
90,
so
that's right.
So they really were kind of, everybody likes to think that their TV shows are feature films, but practically speaking, like it's sort of, you know, when they are 90-minute episodes, they kind of are.
But at least, unlike other, you know, more recent shows, those hit the timing that we're all used to, rather than it being, you know, a movie stretched out over 8 hours.
Yeah.
But when you're doing those longer running series, how does your approach change over time? I mean, and you know, you mentioned earlier how things get more obvious with hindsight, and I'm sure if you knew something was going to be 5 series, you'd have a different approach, and you'd set, you know, little thematic Easter eggs and motifs to build out, but you have no idea at the beginning. So how does that approach change as it goes?
It's a fascinating question, and my experience of it has been one of discovery, really, each time. So with Sherlock, that David Arnold and I scored together, and had the most amazing run of almost 10 years on that show, we discovered, I think, between us, how we felt Sherlock sounded with the Benedict and Martin on screen, as they were, in fact, right way back. There's a pilot episode pre-season 1 of Sherlock, which is available. I think you can find it online in in all the usual places. And that was, it was a 1 hour episode. Different director, didn't have the whizzy graphics, was sort of like a kind of a true pilot. And David and I, we were brought in just to kind of have a look at that. We both knew Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat from other projects, and I don't even think when we went into the room that we thought we were going to write anything. I thought it was do you want to watch this pilot and give us any ideas kind of chat, really. And then David and I went to the pub, as is traditional, and sort of somehow agreed to, we'll just do a pass for you in a week. We'll just throw some things at it, see how you feel. So we went and did just did a week on it, I think, maybe 2 weeks. No recording. It was just all on the synths. I sent it back to them and didn't hear anything for about a year, maybe more, 18 months. It was like, okay, that went well then. And then we found out that they'd sort of gone back to the drawing board, reshot it, reworked as these 3 90-minute episodes that we talked about, and they had a different director in place then. And then we saw the first real episode, if you like, the first episode that was going to be broadcast, and it's the same story as the pilot episode. So it's an incredible, if you're sort of interested as I am in the way that films and TV are put together. It's an amazing A/B to
Mm.
have, to see why one is very successful and the other didn't quite hit the mark. But long and short of it, that first pass that Dave and I had done on the pilot episode seemed to contain almost everything that we needed for the first
Really?
season of Sherlock. Of course, we jazzed it up a bit
Right.
and recorded it and tried to make it really work. But conceptually, a lot of those first impressions were the sort of the seed of the language. Now, what then happened with Sherlock, which is different to how Unforgotten has worked out, is that as Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss's imaginations grew and the scale of the stories grew and the sort of ever more kind of almost operatic sense of what was going on with Sherlock, as it progressed through the different series, then David and I found ourselves just trying to go with that. And so consequently the score, if you kind of A/B a cue from the like season 4 towards the end of that with a season 1 cue, it's so much bigger by the end. We were throwing everything we'd got at it, not just for sort of just because we could, but because it really seemed to, the show seemed to respond to it. Everything was at such a high level of drama, that the sort of this really sort of intense music making seemed to really suit it. And so in a way with Sherlock, there was a sort of a almost kind of like a constant expansion. I'm not quite sure where it would have gone if there ever is a season 5. I'll be the last to know. But if there ever was some more Sherlock, I'd sort of wonder. It felt like, I'm not sure we could get any bigger. Unforgotten, which, as I mentioned, we're on season 5 of that now, is very different because with the first season, I thought I was writing character themes. As you mentioned, you sort of imagined that you would kind of attach themes to either the sort of your leads, or to individual sort of subsidiary characters as they come along. But and that's what I thought I was doing for season 1. And then we came to season 2, and I thought, well, maybe I can keep these tunes for the leads, but have a whole new set of tunes for the other subsidiary characters. But as we tried it, it felt like we were losing something of the essence of the show, and so we sort of went back. I went back with the producers to some of the earlier material, and we tried it up against season 2, against sort of different people, and it was like, oh, actually these aren't character themes, these are concept themes, these are themes, ideas. And so there's things like hope or despair or anger or optimism, or that they're much more about the universality of an emotion than they are about that particular character on that particular day. They had to feel it once in order for us to have, write that cue and have that feeling. But what we've then done subsequently is sort of build a musical language, which almost by repetition, obviously it changes and evolves to a certain extent, but by repetition, you build these fascinating lines of connection between other characters in the same series that you might not necessarily make that connection with, or even back through the series, because you're really saying people feel a very common set of emotions, even people who are in the most different of circumstances, sort of someone who's homeless on the street, someone who is a lord in the sort of in parliament, a multimillionaire, down to somebody doing a cleaning job. Actually, it's their humanity that's kind of common between them, and it's been a really eye-opening sense of how to construct just what you were saying. How do you construct these long arcs? In that, I think those two shows, both of which have run for sort of similar periods of time, I think are constructed in really different ways, which makes it still, fascinating every year to come back to Unforgotten.
Very interesting. And I guess that does go back to something that you said right at the beginning, talking about how the show itself is much more about characters and emotion in particular, and it turns out that was the natural way for the music to be approaching it too.
Totally. And if I'm trying to appear clever in an interview, which is clearly not this one, I will tell you that that's what I thought right at the start of series one. I know how this is all going to go. This is exactly, but no, it's a process of discovery, and being open enough. I think maybe, and if we talk about some of the things projects that I was involved in sort of earlier in my career, I think maybe one of the differences that I notice in myself now, and I'm considerably longer in the tooth, it is an openness to fail and to not know the right answer, which is slightly counterintuitive in that you sort of think, maybe after all these years in the industry, you would either want to project that you know the right answer, or sort of, or perhaps experience, feel that you do know the right answer. And one of the continuing joys, I think, of sort of carrying on working is feeling comfortable enough, and I guess that's where the confidence or experience gets me, is to feel confident enough to be vulnerable, which is sort of a great state to be in. I say I don't know in spotting sessions and in review meetings like 10 times as much as I would have done when I was 30.
Well, and I think that's a natural progression, or at least I hope that it is for most people, where as you get more knowledgeable and experienced, you realize in a lot of instances it's okay to not know something, and or to go, oh, I thought this was going to work, but you know what, it doesn't, and we need to reevaluate. But do you think, I mean, and so obviously part of being the opposite when you're younger is just kind of that confidence of youth. But do you think part of it is also like a necessary aspect of when you're a younger composer working in media, because there are only so many projects and it seems like such a competitive, tough industry to break into, that if you show, weakness in your first, second, third project, maybe people will get the wrong idea about you.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think it's more driven by terror than it is by anything else. I remember visceral feelings of fear early on, just sort of not just passing sort of sensations of minor nerves, but those proper, I'm about to be sick. I feel I haven't slept for days and weeks. This is, and I mean, for me, my route, I think, was one that I still see people going on similar paths now, but also as in that I was an assistant, first of all, to the late great Michael Kamen for 5 years, and during that 5 years of being part of his sort of amazing but crazy team of people, and I was in the period, for anybody who's enjoyed Michael Kamen scores over the years, I started with the first X-Men film, and a film called what did we do? Event Horizon. That was my first day on the job. It's very dark sci-fi film, but
yeah, yes,
a cult classic now. I'm not sure if it qualifies. So I started at that end and went through to Band of Brothers. That was the last project I did with Michael. But one of the things that experience of those 5 years did show me, or allowed me to participate in, was this sense of extraordinary freedom that Michael allowed himself, which could be quite frustrating if you were the one who was trying to organize everything and get it all to happen. But Michael sort of refused in many and complicated ways to sort of be tied down to either doing a score the expected way or to go by the time constraints we might be under at the time. And I think when I started working with him, and that was to continue with my own writing, I found myself sort of with a slightly overdeveloped skill set of keeping complicated film scores together without them collapsing, that was slightly more overdeveloped than I think where I was as a writer at the time. So I ended up accidentally doing 5 years of music editing as well, because I had this experience then of working on these really big scores. So for instance, I ended up sort of music editing all 3 Lord of the Rings films, and
really,
yeah. So I spent there again absolutely accidentally, in that I knew some of my good friends were down at Abbey Road, in the studio there that I'd met while working with Michael Kamen, and they just needed an extra pair of hands for 6 weeks, so they said, just because they were crewing up for the first Lord of the Rings film. And as is always the case, it's never 6 weeks. So we did the first film. It was an extraordinary sort of technical flurry, and obviously Hal Shaw's amazing, sort of legendary score, but the film was changing all the time till right at the last minute, it's all the usual things. And then it turned out that there were going to be extended versions of each of the Lord of the Rings films that had like 45 minutes of extra scenes in them. Did they? How's the music going to work for that? So myself and a wonderful team of people ended up working as a music edit team of all 3 films and all 3 extended directors versions. And then and also I in between managed to end up music editing Love Actually and Bridget Jones 2 and a bunch of romantic comedies. But again, unknown reasons. But I think for me, part of that was that my kind of practical sense of how to get something across the line was getting a good solid workout most of the time, and I wasn't really letting myself take the time to develop my writing in that same sense. And so after I'd worked with Alfonso Cuarón on Children of Men for a year, which is I think a stone cold masterpiece. It's a beautiful film.
Absolutely.
I decided to if I was going to, I couldn't hold the music editing or sort of score production in balance with writing anymore, and I had to sort of draw a line under music editing. And it was an amazing film to broadly be the last one that I did. And then it was fascinating to then try and fill the space in a different way than being kind of just the person. I mean, I know some amazing music editors and score producers who are great artists in their own right, but there's a certain sort of characteristic usually of people in that role, which it's about being calm under pressure. It's about being incredibly methodical and organized with a machine of many moving parts. And so I think part of what I took the opportunity to let myself do perhaps in my 30s and into my 40s was let myself not be quite so organized. Let myself not be quite so kind of eager to fix things down and to play more, and again, sort of, I don't think you can ever generate the outcome or predict the outcome of something like that. But for me, that coincided then with writing a lot more with David Arnold, who I'd met a few years before that, uh, and I've sort of both been really grateful and enjoyed this sort of space, I think, that I've moved into.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you know, I think it makes sense as a progression too. There's a couple pieces I do want to jump onto in a moment. So
Oh, for
one
sure.
is talking about, oh, there's more than that, frankly. But we don't have 5 hours.
Yeah.
Um, but I do want to ask really quick, and you mentioned it was your first day on the job working on Event Horizon, and I mean I do think that truly has become like a cult classic, especially the last few
Yeah.
years. And interestingly too, I think the score also featured Orbital. I don't know if it was co-written or if they were just separate cues. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it. Um,
Yeah. I
but
think collided with each other might be the best response, physically as well as everything else.
and so does it surprise you that that movie has such a like fervent following now, and I think as time goes on gets more and more popular and well regarded.
Um, I wonder if it's films or TV or albums that take a really strong position.
Mm.
So that are really very themselves. And at the time, I think it's almost always too much. It's like, what is that? Why is that so off the scale in so many different ways? But I think then as time passes and we look back at films and albums, books, you don't really remember the ones that were just kind of
Yeah.
safely what everybody else is doing at the time. Because slightly, why would you? They they and so there's something. But I've got a very soft spot, and obviously, sort of, it was really the first Hollywood project that I ever was a tiny part of. Um, but I, there is actually that little thought in there that I do wonder about for projects or for my own work these days. In that, taking a really strong position, um, you'll either be really right or really wrong, and I think that's a bit more fun. I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think too with that movie in particular, there's kind of a mythology that's grown up about it. That supposedly there are even more extreme cuts and footage that have disappeared or been lost, and it really gets people wondering, like, what else was there?
That I mean, there's probably I shouldn't say this on the on the internet, but there's probably somewhere in a hard drive in my loft, like early versions that were working. In fact, I definitely shouldn't say that. It's not online, can't hack me. And but I think there's this sort of, I mean, it touches on how much of a strange and insular but also wonderful world it is being part of the production uh, on a movie or a TV show. In that there um, there are certain ones where, and this I often say this to younger composers or people who want to perhaps find themselves in a composer team or come and visit in a studio, and is to say that the room that you're in, whether it's the studio for a session or the cutting room with the filmmakers, is absolutely or should be an incredibly safe space, in that you want everybody in that room to feel that they can trust everybody else in that room, so that they can say the wild thing, they
Mm.
can put that shot in that really shouldn't be in, that they can try things. And um, so when that really works, when there's trust between the composer and the filmmaker with their execs and the studio teams, you set the conditions that it doesn't always produce exceptional results, but you set the conditions for it. And often when it doesn't work, and I've been part of a lot of shows, a lot of films that have been fairly tense. It's because that trust has broken down, and I look for that in collaborators and people to work with in all sort of forms of my work now. Is that I like that atmosphere of trust.
Interesting. I mean, and it makes absolute sense, and that's something that I would want to talk about more. That collaborations generally, working with David Arnold and Peter Gregson, who I actually had on the show about probably around this time last year to talk about his release for
Oh,
Patina.
amazing! Was he
Um,
rude about me? Did he even mention me at all?
no,
Barely.
I asked if he knew you. He's like, never heard of him.
Never liked it.
um,
Love Peter.
but and maybe we can turn back to that at the end
Sure.
if we have time. However, I don't want to forget that you also have a new release out. It came out in what, earlier mid August, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we've been slightly. This is the album called Whitsun, and I mean, it's. I think and this touches on some of the things that we've been talking about earlier. The layers of vulnerability, the layers of private to public, the different permissions that we all give ourselves have always fascinated me. We were talking about the sort of permission to even sort of strike out as a composer rather than the music editor, permission to write, to make albums, not just scores, what permission you give yourself for what those albums might be. And I released 2 albums and an EP, in fact a couple of EPs on a label called Erased Tapes, which I'd been part of an ongoing exploration really about. Often they were to do with a sense of place, and I recorded the first album in Berlin, which was a great experience, and actually sort of got a flat share and moved over there for a while I was sort of, working on it to just really soak up the atmosphere. And then the second album I did in it's called Tender Symmetry. I did in a series of locations in the UK, sort of not studios, including some tunnels in the cliffs of Dover where Peter Gregson, the aforementioned cellist, and I wore hard hats to be underground playing and recording in these tunnels 90 feet under the ground. And Kieran, our lovely singer, that if anybody wants to see humorous pictures of those, they're available on my Instagram. And but what I found myself returning to in this last year was that although those are fascinating projects that I was really keen on, also they were always at some distance from me as a person. It's like I love Berlin, but it's not where I grew up. Like it's someone else's story, and it's a super cool story, and all these different houses and different locations in the UK, they're really interesting, but they're not my story. And the origin of Whitsun was when we were clearing my granddad's house after he passed away quite a few years ago now. One of the members of the family found a book of pictures of my mum, her baby book from when she was clearly a baby, and they somehow, I think, they were passed around. I'm not sure my mum wanted to keep them. They arrived on my desk, and one of the cousins said, "Oh, do you want to keep these?" And I looked at these and thought, these are amazing. So it's a series of little sort of sepia pictures, photographs of my mum in the first couple of years. One particular little collection of them taken on the beach at Scarborough in Yorkshire, with my grandparents holding my mum between them when she's 1. And you look at it and it looks like a perfect sort of nostalgic family shot on the beach. But then the handwritten date note underneath says, I think it's July or August 1939. So both literally and metaphorically, because they're on the sort of on the east coast of England, the Second World War is just out of sight, and
Yeah.
they were looking in the direction of what was going to be the sort of most significant world war in many ways that there's ever been, and yet there was this innocence. It was sort of like a 1-year-old little girl, and the granddad wearing amazing sort of trousers quite high up around his waist, and everything that you'd hope for a picture from the 1930s. And so I sort of took this as a starting point to make what is in fact a really, really personal album, where there's sort of, I wasn't hiding behind any of the things that I usually hide behind, which is other people's beautiful playing and orchestras and big studios and those sort of things. So I played everything myself, and I've got a piano called an una corda piano, which is a single stringed piano. It's got a very distinctive sound. It's a beautiful handmade thing, where the strings are slightly thicker because there's just one of them, and so there's almost a bell-like quality to it. And then I have a slightly unnecessary collection of beautiful vintage synths as well. So that there's some vintage synths on it, and some piano, and a little bit of singing, and some trumpet, which is the instrument I played all the way through school and uni. And in a way, I think that album, available on all good streaming services and on cassette and various nostalgic forms for anybody, is I think I've sort of, I mean, again, it's one of the things about sort of, I guess, chatting to artists of any kinds, in that normally our head is in the future. I'm thinking about what we're going to do, and sometimes the lead time of things that you've worked on are such that you're sort of trying to remember how you felt like 1, 2, 3 years ago. But I think for me, Whitsun has been a sort of slightly cathartic process of sort of giving myself permission to be incredibly open and incredibly personal and incredibly vulnerable and simple. It's very simple in many ways album, not hiding behind sort of like sort of whatever orchestral technique I've got. And so I'm now fascinated where next year will go from there, really, because I think the set of permissions that I've given myself are much wider now, which is a lovely free feeling.
Yeah, well, but I mean, I do imagine it's got to be difficult making that decision in the first place, because talking about your childhood loss, things like that, that's not something that you bring up in the first 5 minutes of meeting someone or of small talk. Those are very personal things, and so to be able to pull some of that out and kind of bring it into the world has to be a difficult choice to make.
Yeah, no, it's terrifying, and I think particularly for people who have been in the business of telling other people's stories, and I don't often. I mean, sometimes I would say to someone, I'm not sure why I ended up in sort of scoring films and TV, and they would just look at me and laugh, and they go, well, clearly because you're emotionally avoidant, and actually, although you really want to express things, but you're much happier when you're expressing things at one remove, much happier when you're projecting into someone else's story, and actually all that pent up emotionally avoidant stuff that you're carrying around with yourself is what lifts the music that I hope on a good day that I write for other people's stories, in that I sort of and maybe sometimes too much, but I really care. I really care about what David and I did for Sherlock and Dracula. And sometimes it's amazing, and sometimes the show doesn't go where you think it was. And I care about the music that I write for Unforgotten. In the moment when there's a character on screen and they're experiencing an emotion, I sometimes feel that I'm doing a sort of not dissimilar job to the actors, in that I'm sort of very present with what it is to be that person at the time. And I think if you talk to actors, I've got some lovely actor friends now, and they're perfectly happy talking about everything else apart from really their sort of interior lives, their real selves. They're happier in character because otherwise they wouldn't be actors. That's sort of often there. So yeah, it is very interesting to try and explore that side now. But I'm a parent now. We've got two beautiful children. My own dad sadly died last year. All our parents. Like, I'm in that period of time where I think it's sort of like, if you're not going to do it now, you're not you're not going to go there. So yeah, I think I'm going to pull the plaster off a bit more, see what's underneath.
And I had read about that, and I know it happened last year. I'm sorry to hear about your father. It is a tough thing to go through.
Do you know it's both incredibly commonplace and uniquely challenging. Yeah. I think I understand. I've had so many other friends who've lost parents, had bereavements of all kinds, and I thought I knew, and I hoped I was empathetic, but it's kind of like, oh, okay, now I understand, or I understand. For me, I understand that it is unique for everyone, and I think that's what I've taken from it so far, is that there's, each person's bereavement or grief is so specific that any sort of blanket statements about grief just don't really apply. But to simultaneously be at that stage of life with aging parents, and we've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old in the house now, so life is full right now in a very wonderful way.
And it is an interesting way to phrase it like that as well, where in that instance, or that context, for instance, where everyone's grief and bereavement is unique in their own. The same thing had happened to me when I was a child, and so I can I empathize with people when that happens to them. But it's been however many years at this point. I have no idea what to say to somebody, and at the same time, I don't know. I can't think about, if only someone would have said this to me, I'd have felt better. It's like we're all so siloed off in one regard.
I think it's fascinating. It's an incredible, still in sort of all many parts of Western culture, an incredible taboo. In that it's one of the few things. British people don't like talking about money either. Americans are happy to talk about that, but basically death and taxes. Nobody really wants to sort of approach them. And I think for me, my experience of trying to explain to Emily, our daughter, about death, and because little kids just ask the questions, they're not holding back for fear of offense. They're just going to go, "Where's Granddad? And is he coming back?" All the sort of stuff that really, you kind of got to face up to. And so I don't think there's never any right or wrong things to say, but I think perhaps presence is always appreciated, and I think it's probably what I've learned. Whether that is silent presence or sort of virtual, I think presence rather than absence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very good advice on that regard. Somewhat similarly too. It's one thing to tell your children or your grandchildren about, and not literally for you, but broadly speaking, about your childhood, how things were growing up. I had that experience a lot when I was younger, but it's also that's a unique position now to where you can have your kids listen to this and be like, this is kind of my sonic reimagining or nostalgia of my childhood, and something that, for pretty much the rest of us out there, won't have that same experience. So an interesting gift you can give too.
I One of the things that we have found ourselves as a family doing, we take, I'm a bit of an amateur photographer, so we take loads of pictures and videos on various formats, unnecessarily expensive cameras. And actually, what we're finding as a family is that music is one of the ways that we sort of communicate with each other. So both the kids absolutely love making up songs, dancing, coming and sitting. We were talking about working from home earlier. I now work from home rather than having a separate studio, which is a mixed blessing, shall we say. It's a little less easy to concentrate sometimes, but also marvelous to be around everyone. And in a way, we're sort of, we don't think about it very much because it sort of just is part of the air that we breathe, I think, around here. But it's sort of an extra way that we communicate with each other. I'm often fascinated by bilingual families or trilingual families, in that I've sort of resolutely monolingual, basically. It's classic sort of British, terrible at languages. But I look at families who switch between languages as they're speaking to each other. They seem to have sort of some words in one language for certain situations, and then they will sort of seamlessly switch into another language. And I think we, as a family, we sort of do that with music as our second language. So we'll start singing things to each other, just like, what do you want for breakfast? I like some toast. And it sounds like some sort of dreadful kind of like stage, like one of those episodes from Glee that you really hoped wasn't going to happen. But actually, what it sort of, it then has this fascinating sort of connection. I don't know whether either of the kids will want to make music their career. I secretly hope they don't, really. It's fairly brutal. But I hope that they keep the joy and spontaneity, whatever they do, keep the joy and spontaneity of having music as a language. And that is my profound hope for for anyone who's listening, is that the innate joy of making and participating in music is, it doesn't cost anything. The heart of it can't be commercialized. It in itself is it's almost the purest expression of sort of joy and connection that you can ever have. And it's sort of so easy. I mean, I don't know what your experience of this has been, but for many people, they would play as a child or play as a teenager or maybe even play through college, but then life gets in the way, and then playing takes less. There are other things that we feel we should do, but if just one person made a little moment to play something or sing themselves, or with someone else in their family or with a friend, just that tiny one act, I think, is joyful and worthwhile.
It is. And I would imagine there's not a single person, or at least very few people, who played as a kid or in college and then, it fell away, who are happy about that, who are like, you know what? Not playing the piano, never touching it again, best decision of my life.
Nobody ever says that at a party, do they? And it's something, once in a while, if you are in a sort of social situation, it's always the thing sort of not to mention. If somebody does say, "Oh, what do you do?" You're just going to go, "I sell insurance." Just because if you say that you're a musician or you're a composer, for some people it lands really tough for them, because they kind of go, "I loved playing XYZ, whatever the instrument was. I loved singing, and I don't do it anymore." And you spend the next 20 minutes with your sort of arm around them, feeding them wine. Go, "It's going to be okay. You just sing some show tunes. It's going to be good."
Well, on that note, Michael, and I realize we're getting close to time. I'll release you
Oh, a joy to talk to you though. What a joy.
No, it was great, and I really do appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on. Great to chat, and I've spun Whitsun quite a few times. It's a very good listen. I'd
Oh,
recommend it to everyone.
thank you so much. Well, thanks to you, and to anyone, if you do find yourself playing or singing, send me a note on Twitter. Cheer us both up. That's what I think we should do.
Excellent. So thank you again.
No problem.